Hello, my name is Lorraine Creech, Head of Nursing at Mesothelioma UK. Thank you for joining us again today on this series of interviews we've done with various people throughout the mesothelioma community and people who have linked into the mesothelioma community. So as I say, thank you for joining me. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Colette Willoughby, who is the Managing Director of Asbestos Compliance Ltd. Colette lives in Helsby, close to Chester in the northwest. Academically, she gained a master's degree in health and safety law and environmental law from the University of Salford, and a diploma on occupational safety and health from Nottingham Trent University, so very well skilled and qualified in the field. I've got a quote from Colette, which is her own quote, saying that she's been involved with asbestos consultancy industry since the early 1980s. You don't look old enough for that, Colette.
Thank you.
And since that time, have been involved with many changes to how asbestos is perceived and dealt with. I'm passionate about ensuring quality of services and also about providing advice to allow risks to be properly managed and to prevent unnecessary exposure to asbestos. You go on to say we've come a long way since you started your career within the industry, but there's still further to go. And I can really know the feeling of that in my own career. We're ever learning, aren't we? Ever developing and trying to just take things forward. So thank you so much for joining me today, giving up your very busy time to speak to me and the mesothelioma community. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you became involved in the management of asbestos?
Well, as you've already sort of so kindly sort of put together in a nice compact way, I have been involved sort of in the asbestos industry for probably more years than I'd like to sort of really remember. Sort of getting close to 40 years now. Having sort of been out there as an analyst surveyor, a trainer, project manager, all the sort of the usual sort of gambit of things. But it was probably about 20 years ago that I really got involved with the management of asbestos. Although we talk nowadays an awful lot about managing asbestos and looking at the risks and everything else, it was only in the sort of like the early 2000s when we started to have any sort of regulatory sort of control that talked about the duty to manage from sort of like 2002. I recall from sort of just sort of 2000 to 2001 being invited over to Leeds by the NHS over there to basically sort of quote for some work, for some surveying work and some analytical works. And at the same time, they brought some removal contractors along who were also going to quote for the removal side. And we were basically all just sort of like left to it to have a wander around with a survey report and then give them a price at the end. I suppose I've always been one for, probably not keeping my mouth shut, maybe sometimes when I should do, but I just passed comment on the fact that we couldn't all price on a like-for-like basis because they hadn't really defined what they wanted. We really needed to know what the outcome was that they wanted from the removal works. Did they want areas just making safe? Did they want it all removing? How far did they want us to go? Did they want us to include underground ducts? And I think after an hour or two of felt like, I suppose at the time, picking holes in everything they'd asked, I was escorted off to a room on my own. I thought, oh gosh, no, here we go. I'm in trouble again. And at the time, it was very much their sort of head of estate sort of said, we're actually looking for somebody like you to help us. We've got so many hospital sites and so much asbestos. And we don't really know where to go with it. We know that we need to do something about it. And we also know that there are potentially some new regulations on the horizon. So we really need somebody that, yes, will stand up and will say, what they believe, and try and direct us in the right way. I suppose that was probably really the start of it, and I think it was useful because it meant then that not only was I using all the knowledge that I'd sort of built up over sort of like the previous sort of 20 years of, knowing what to look for, how to analyse it, how to manage that type of works. But I could then combine it with, okay, we need to take that on board, but we are still in a functioning hospital environment. So that service still needs to be maintained. How do we do all of that? Keep people safe and keep within the law. And it was very, very good experience. But also I think it helped because in those days, I say, it was quite the early stages of managing asbestos. So it was useful, I think, in some ways to be able to sort of like forge forward and build sort of even more relationship with the health and safety executive, as well as to some of the ways in which we were looking at things and some of the practical difficulties as well. So I think over my career I've probably been quite fortunate in some of the positions I've ended up with, which I like to think have sort of like helped me sort of more as an all-round person as well.
Yeah, I can understand that. So really, it was about the time we were talking about asbestos as the hidden enemy then, wasn't it, really? And,
yeah.
and I suppose the general public, they will often think about removal of asbestos rather than management of asbestos. And as you say, you're trying to, keep plates spinning, aren't you, within environments?
Yeah, I think we still have quite a lot to do on the education front, because asbestos is always that, that awful word as soon as somebody mentions it, and quite rightly so, because obviously it's responsible for so many horrendous illnesses and so many deaths that we're still suffering from in the UK. But I always sort of try and get across, particularly when I do any sort of training with people, is just to try and say, well, it isn't all the same. We do need to know what it is that we're dealing with, and not necessarily just the asbestos sort of fibre type, because sometimes people can get a little bit sort of probably too bogged down with that. I know quite often people sort of think, oh, asbestos, it's something very, very technical, so therefore I can't possibly know about it, I can't understand it. But I always like to try and sort of simplify things, because I think if you simplify it, you're more likely to get people to understand it and maybe realise why they have to do certain things or don't have to do certain things. And yet, as soon as the word asbestos crops up, I think more often than not, the automatic assumption is we have to remove it. Whereas, even if you just look at some of the sort of like the simple sort of premise with asbestos, once you start to remove it, you do actually increase the risk, because the main risk is if people breathe it in, which means it's got to be in the air, and the only time it can be in the air if you disturb it. And there will be certain materials that, yes, because of the location and their condition, the only course of action may well be to remove them. But there'll be other ones that are perfectly fine. They're in a safe condition, they're sealed, they're a low risk material. So if you then start to try and remove them, you're actually just increasing the risk. So it's about getting that basic understanding to sort of start with, to figure out, do we need to remove it, or do we actually need to manage it? And so a lot of that, it's not just about the fact that it's asbestos, it's the product itself. And I think the more that people can sort of understand that and start to appreciate sort of like the differences between, different materials. I mean, for example, if we take, we've in the UK, we've had more than sort of 3,000 known uses for asbestos. So that's a vast number of products that contain it. But if we looked at sort of like the bottom end of the scale, well, we may have something like bonded products like vinyl floor tiles, which have asbestos in there. It's a very small amount, but it's well and truly bound in the vinyl material. If you go to the opposite end of the extreme and you have something like a sprayed material, sprayed coating that might have 85-90% asbestos in there, those two present completely different risks. And you can look at it and think, well, okay, the vinyl product does contain asbestos, but the chances of anybody releasing any fibre out of that are so slim. Whereas if you had a sprayed material, you've got something that's very soft, but it's almost all asbestos. So even just sort of taking those sort of like simple concepts, if you were given both of those and you've only got a limited pot of money, which one's going to cause you the problems? Clearly the sprayed asbestos. It's got far more asbestos in there. It's quite soft, it's quite easy to disturb, so it's always going to cause the biggest risk. Whereas the vinyl products, say, you are unlikely, you would have to do some to actually release the asbestos out of a vinyl product. Even when analysts are looking at them in the laboratory to try and detect what's in there, it's not always that easy to remove the asbestos from it, and that's in a laboratory situation. So yeah, in those circumstances, the right course of action would be, well, you would just manage that product. You'd keep an eye on it to make sure that nobody's going to work on it where they might sort of cause a problem with it. But it would be quite right just to leave it in place.
We often get, or fairly often get, calls to our Meso UK information line from what we term really as people who are becoming the worried well, because they know that they've had some contact with asbestos and now know that it might be within the home, in the loft, or, and it can really have a very detrimental effect on the mental health, so much so that it, you know, it can affect how they continue to work. It can affect their relationships because they are becoming so focused on the problem, which of course we want people to know about the problems, but the ripples out from the location of asbestos are massive, aren't they, really?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to the sort of almost like the whole sort of education piece, that not all asbestos is the same, and yeah, there are lots of statistics that sort of look about sort of like the three main fibre types. Some of them, you know, tend to be sort of linked with being more carcinogenic than others. But I think it still comes back to what product is it in and what's the likelihood of that material then being released into the air. And because asbestos, whenever it makes the headlines, it's never good reading. And I don't want to play that down, because I think people do need to be aware of it. They do need to know that it's something that needs to be sort of like handled with care and correctly. But it's trying to take sort of like some of that sort of like, I don't know, sort of like over caution or over concern out of it, so that people can sort of like look at it realistically and be able to have an objective viewpoint on, yes, okay, I might have some asbestos, but as long as I don't do X, Y, and Z, I will actually be fine. Or yes, I've got some asbestos, it's this particular type, but I've got some expert advice now and we need to do A, B, and C with it instead. So it's more about sort of taking some of, you know, almost sort of like that hysteria out of it, just so that we get everybody sort of like with a better understanding. And say, but it's always difficult, and I fully appreciate it, you know, when it's in somebody's home or if it's something that somebody's worked with, because I quite often get involved with situations where something's gone wrong, somebody thinks they've been exposed, or they think they may have been exposed for a number of years because they've come across it in their workplace, and it's trying to sort of like understand what the concerns are and whether or not they can be alleviated by just sort of explaining some of the sort of like the simple parameters. But I understand, yeah, and sometimes, you know, it plays so much on people's minds that yes, they do suffer sort of, you know, mental health effects from it, and you know, I can empathise, I can sympathise with them completely.
So it's all about awareness, management, registering, and making sure we have the processes for that.
Yeah.
From you telling me about how you first became involved with asbestos management, I can tell now why you are involved in so many organisational bodies, which actually is amazing. So you are chairperson of NORAC, which is the National Organisation of Asbestos Consultants. What does that entail?
I mean, NORAC was set up, we're coming up for our 10th anniversary this year, and I set it up originally as a going out and about and meeting various other sort of analysts and surveyors and consultants, and quite often they would ask maybe some basic questions, because one of my other roles is I do assessing for UCAS as well, so I do get to meet sort of quite a few companies out there, and it would be very much, oh, we think we've got an issue with this is how we were going to tackle it, what do you think? And I think they just appreciated some of the pragmatic and practical advice, you know, just trying to look at, well, you know, what's the risk from that, what are we trying to achieve, you know, is that an appropriate way of doing it, or maybe there's a better way, or maybe that's perfectly fine. And it became quite clear that there are lots and lots of pockets of like smaller organisations that just wanted an ear. They wanted just to be able to talk to other people that were probably in a similar position, all grappling with the same day-to-day issues. So it was originally just set up as a very much an informal group. where people could come together and just discuss, we've actually come across this problem. Have you seen it before? Have you found that? Or how would you tackle this? Or we've got problems with this piece of equipment that we use for measuring. Has anybody got something better? And it quite sort of quickly grew where people go, no, actually, this is really useful. It's really good to be able to speak and, speak to others and sort of share experiences. So within something that started off over in the sort of Yorkshire area, within sort of like 2 years, it sort of spread from the north all the way down to the south, and then the following year up into the northeast and into Scotland as well. And ultimately was then formed into a trade association. So it is very much a body of sort of like asbestos analysts and surveyors that can come together, can share those experiences, but can also look at what can we do as a sort of combined industry to try and help the situation out there. Can we do things better? Can we get the quality of work better? Because for those that may get involved sort of like in the asbestos sector, it quite often goes a little bit hand in hand with, maybe issues out there with substandard work as well. Maybe sometimes people aren't giving the best advice, and that may well be because those that are giving the advice may not necessarily fully understand everything. So they think they're doing the right thing, but maybe they're not, but they don't have anybody else really to, sort of bounce that off. So it's trying to look at, can we make the industry better for people, that we're serving? So, that's, like the workers that are out there that might be working in buildings that contain asbestos, or people that might have it in their homes, or just sort of like large organisations. So although NORAC is predominantly sort of analysts and surveyor organisations, we do have a small number of what we refer to as sort of clients or duty holders. So, they're the people that will manage sort of like the building. So they're responsible for the workers that, potentially might go in and disturb asbestos, because at the end of the day, they're the end user of the services from the analysts and surveyors. So it's important that they understand the limitations on an analyst and surveyor, but also that the analysts and surveyors understand what that client needs as an output as well at the end, because it's quite easy to almost sort of sit in your own little box, appreciate your job, but not appreciate the impact that it might have on everybody else. So it's been good in that way to sort of bring everybody together and say, almost like throw everybody into a room and go, right, let's fight it out together. Let's discuss what the issues are and see what we can and can't do, or get everybody to appreciate maybe certain restrictions or limitations, and say it's gone from strength to strength. So I think we've been sort of quite fortunate as well, because we've also started to produce some little bits of our own sort of technical guidance, because although we do have a huge raft of sort of guidance that the Health and Safety Executive have put together, but you can never cover every eventuality. So sometimes there are always those grey areas with, well, we need to do this. What's the best way of doing it? So we have produced a number of sort of like short guidance documents as well that are only a couple of pages long, but really just get to sort of like the nub of some of just like the practical little issues as to, okay, yeah, we've got some photographs in there that give us some examples, and it just sort of almost puts it more into a real life sort of scenario. But hopefully, it's still early days, although we're coming up to our sort of 10th anniversary. We feel like we've got a long way to go. There's still a lot to do.
I'm thinking of the analogy with health about, the right treatment at the right time for the right person. And simply, I think that's what you're saying, the right advice for the right scenario, giving the right outcome, isn't it?
Yeah.
How interesting is that? Yeah. So you're also a principal asbestos examiner for the British Occupational Hygiene Society, BOSS, and also a member of the technical advisory group, which sounds very prestigious, and that does sound like a full-time job again for me, but can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've BOHS, or the British Occupational Hygiene Society, has been going since the early 1960s, and like the main sort of part at the heart of BOHS is all about sort of like worker health protection. So BOHS gets involved with anything that's toxic that somebody might work with, and obviously asbestos is quite a big facet to that, and BOHS produce a huge array of qualifications. That's probably sort of like the pinnacle of everything. So that, you know, there's training, there's qualifications that sit on the back of it. So it covers all areas in occupational hygiene, and one of those is asbestos. So my role as the principal examiner for asbestos is responsibility for all the asbestos qualifications that we run in the UK, but also internationally as well. So we have, I think we have about sort of 10 individual asbestos qualifications. So part of my remit is to make sure that they're current, they're fit for purpose. If we've got any sort of changes on the horizon to any sort of legislation or guidance, that I've kept abreast of that. I've made sure that, you know, we're updating qualifications, but also looking at, you know, as time moves on, you know, qualifications need to adapt, they need to develop, and we only need to look at, you know, the last sort of 18 months where the whole world has changed. So even how people sort of like learn has changed as well. So we've just, well, for my sins, embarked on a huge project to overhaul all these asbestos qualifications with that aim in mind, to look at, are they still appropriate, you know, for how people go out and sort of in effect ply their trade out there? Do the qualifications match that? You know, do we need to do something different? You know, we've just had the release of a new HSE guidance document called the Analyst Guide, which has made a number of changes across the asbestos industry. So part of the overhaul was looking at that to make sure we'd factored all that in, but also looking at, you know, if people are using online tools for training, online tools for examination, to make sure that whatever we're sort of producing is the best it possibly can be. So that's sort of my principal examiner role, but the technical advisory group also then looks at the whole sort of remit within BOHS for sort of like the technical guidance that's necessary for all the qualifications. So yes, it probably is something that, in some respects, it probably is a full-time job.
Absolutely massive.
I think it's one of those, although I quite often sort of say to my husband, I'm going to retire soon. And it's like, you'll never retire because you would just get bored. So I think I like to keep busy, but I tend to find lots of my roles sort of, they're so intertwined with each other. It's all about, you know, one thing feeds into another, and the next thing you know, it's like, oh, it's Sunday evening. Oh, it's time to start the week again. Yes, maybe I'll have a rest for an hour or two.
And you're also closely involved with FAM, the Faculty of Asbestos Assessment and Management. So yes. What's your involvement there?
This faculty, it's a faculty that's part of BOHS. Within BOHS, there's the Faculty of Occupational Hygiene, which is the broad spectrum of occupational hygiene, but then there's the Faculty of Asbestos Assessment and Management, which was set up, I think it's 4 years ago now, because at that time it was seen that, and I know this is going to sound a bit, you know, I don't know, sort of twee, but we quite often coined the phrase that we've got all these sort of like analysts and surveyors out there, but there was no sort of like home for them as an individual, no professional home where they could be part of something that would sort of like help them with sort of peer reviews, help them maybe sort of progress professionally. So FAM was devised with that in mind, to have lots of different sort of levels within it that look at people even who've just come into the asbestos industry, you know, as maybe an analyst or a surveyor, or people that are right at the top of the profession that are out there, you know, acting as expert witnesses, giving sort of like, you know, high level consultancy advice, and whole different rafts of levels in between, including sort of clients, duty holders. So my role within that is actually on the management committee. I was involved at the very start when we sort of put it all together to get it off the ground. So now it's more trying to sort of keep it going, and again sort of looking at, you know, do we need to do anything different with it? You know, it's been going sort of 3-4 years, so it's still in its infancy. So it's all about creating something that's going to add value to the, you know, the sectors that are out there. And you know, I think one of the main things, which I know we sort of started off quite early on as part of our discussion today, is about that whole education piece. just getting the right information out there to the right people at the right time. And I think FAM obviously is 100% behind that as well, and just looking at sort of professional standards. So that if we have got people out there that are providing advice, that it's the correct advice, but it's backed up professionally as well, so that if somebody's thinking, okay, I can, I can go on Google, I can type in asbestos, you can get hundreds and hundreds of pages of, contact this person, contact that person. It's knowing that you're going, you're actually going to be contacting somebody that's bound by a code of ethics. They're going to provide the right information, and not necessarily maybe because financially that's the best information for them to be giving you, for their own purposes. So that's probably sort of like one of the main things behind it, is just to make sure that, we are catering sort of correctly for what's needed out there.
I was going to ask you about your aspirations for the management of asbestos, but I think you've probably covered those, haven't you, in everything that you've said to us and all your involvement. Would you say you've covered that?
Possibly, but I think I know if we look at, obviously the UK always wants to be the top of the leaderboard for everything, and I think if we sort of take away sports and everything else, which I know is always a completely different sort of topic to go down, but
I have to say, we're recording this on the day that England played Germany tonight.
So. I know, so maybe we're all still smiling at the moment, and hopefully tonight we'll all still be smiling as well. But if we were sort of just to try and look at that, if we take asbestos, we can sort of go back and sort of go, well, okay, maybe we hit the top of the leaderboard for that with, the highest import rate in the world of asbestos, the most widely used material. We imported far more asbestos than any other country, particularly after the Second World War. We used it with great, abundance throughout buildings. It doesn't matter whether it's the workplace, whether it's the domestic, environment. And, as a result, we ended up at the top of the leaderboard with the number of death rates that we've got, and we're still right up there. So I would think my aspiration really is, for once, we don't want to be at the top of the leaderboard. We actually want our death rates to be coming down. I know we have predictions every so often that look at, okay, we're still on a bit of an increase, but then we'll plateau, it'll start to drop off, and we just never seem to have quite got there. I remember back in the 80s and the 90s, there was always sort of talk about, when we get to sort of like about 2000, we'll be right at the peak and then everything will drop. And then we got to the point where, actually, duty to manage, nobody had even considered that concept. We'd got all these other regulations, but nobody had actually considered the whole bit about managing it until we got into sort of 2002. So then we had the whole lag period of, actually, we need these regulations to start to take effect and start to work, and maybe then we'll start to see a bit of a plateau. And even when we sort of look back, there were things such as the regulations we had from sort of like the 1980s. We look at the 80s and the 70s, but at that point we had a huge amount of power tools being used on site, which made any work on asbestos even worse, because people were using circular saws to cut up asbestos insulating board. So it's almost like each time we think we've got to, this should actually stop the issue getting any worse, it's almost as if something else sort of just seems to crawl out of the woodwork. Well, actually, we hadn't considered this. Hopefully, we have now got enough things in place, if people are aware of them, that we should start to sort of just get to that peak now. So we should get a plateau and we should get things dropping, because it's still an awful situation for the number of deaths that we get each year. So I think my aspiration really is to make sure that there's enough awareness out there that people do appreciate what they can and can't do, and really where the real risks are, so that once we get over the lag period from exposure to symptoms, and then people sort of like developing the diseases, in particular mesothelioma, because we've got that lag period, we can never see the immediate impact of, we introduce new regulations. It would be nice to see an impact within 6 months or a year, but realistically, we're always going to have quite a number of years before we can truly say, yes, we can actually now see it making a difference. But if we look, duty to manage, nearly 20 years ago since it sort of came in. Okay, full legal impact 2004, but 2002 was when it sort of hit the regulation. So you would like to think that we would now start to see, you know, that plateau, you know, and then the decline. So yeah, hopefully that's my aspiration, that we get the message out there enough, and hopefully I don't talk people to death too much, that it still sinks in, and you know, we can actually sort of start to see and make a difference.
Colette, it's been absolutely fascinating just listening to you today, and just, you know, just hanging on your words about how important everything is, and, you know, where we have come from, where we're going to, and where we've still got to achieve, really. So it's been really, really interesting. Thank you for giving up your time.
Okay.
I also do want to say that I think you've agreed to join us, hopefully, at our ladies Mesothelioma UK Ladies Lunch next year in March. God willing that we can be meeting together then. So I'm glad that you said that you can join us on that occasion, which links in with International Women's Day. And I believe that's on the 6th of March next year. So I look forward to seeing you then, if I don't see you before. But thank you so much for giving up your time today, and really broadening my horizons, I think, and I hope all our viewers will think that too. So great to have had you by my side today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me along as well.
You're very welcome. Bye bye for now. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.